fact and fiction are sometimes a little closer than people think.
These things come down and they contact people, they engage with people, and they've been doing it for a long time.
It's human nature to be fearful of the unknown.
It's time to make contact.
My name's Alan Steinfeld, and I do a program called New Realities. It's on YouTube. Let's get to my favorite subject, because for me, the contact experience is about consciousness. It's about a shift of awareness. At least that's how I see it. We're here representing many different levels of contact. I'll just do a brief introduction, and I'll ask some questions, and we'll take some questions from the crowd. There at the far end there, one of the most well-known contactees, one of a person really dedicated to the truth of this experience and has been questioning this since 1985. Was that 85, Whitley, from the cabinet?
Yeah, it was December the 26th, 1985, when I was reawakened.
His life changed forever. You could read it in communion. It was Whitley who really generated that graphic everyone knows of that alien with the big eyes, narrow face. It was from that cover communion. I mean, part of the history here is what Whitley Strieber has put down in writing and has spoken about, and he keeps evolving his ideas of what contact is. So let's give Whitley a big hand there.
Thank you.
Next to Whitley is my cohort there, Robert Perala, who had an amazing contact experience at, what, 21?
Yeah.
21, didn't know anything about it, he was a rock and roll guy, and boom, he was taken out, had this, well, maybe he'll talk about it, had this very intense experience that you never forgot. I mean, you can't forget that, can you? And he's written this book, The Divine Blueprint. He also puts out the Pirela report, Extraterrestrials Are Here. And so he'll tell you a little bit about that. But in the early 20s, he went to one of the first UFO conferences that existed, right? In, where was that?
That would make me about 97 right now. Actually, it was 1978, right. A long time ago. And I'll be happy to share that experience with you today. I'm at 61. I'm, I guess, one of the oldest guys in the business, but
no, you're
happy
not.
to be
no,
here.
You're not.
No?
You got a long way to go, fella.
I got a long way. Thank you. Thanks, Dad.
Okay.
Okay, y'all. I'll tell you about it later.
All right, we'll get to that. And Steve Murillo, welcome to Contact in the Desert.
Thank you very much.
How's your experience been?
Outstanding.
Really?
I love Contact in the Desert. It's sort of like the Burning Man for ufology, but in a very low-key, very, very loving way. What I love about Contact is we're grounded in the earth here. You know what I mean? You see people walking around all day barefoot. We're grounding ourselves, and we are trying to understand this phenomenon. And I love the fact that it's a bunch of like-minded people trying to get to the truth behind all of this.
You know, I think that's a really good point. We're grounded in the earth. We're earth people. It doesn't matter where you say you're from. We're right here in this earth body, and the fact that we're actually in an earthy sort of place, we represent the earth. So we're here.
I agree. Yeah.
So you're an ex-military person?
I was a military pilot, was in the Marine Corps, but I did not have any experiences while I was in the military. I got out, I was 29 when I got out of the military. I didn't have a profound sighting until I was 2001. Right. So, but that sighting is what really got me involved in the field, and next thing you know, I'm head of MUFON LA for 30 years.
Oh, you're the head of MUFON
LA? I
Uh-huh.
was. And we are now UPARS Los Angeles. We study, we don't just consider UFOs anymore, we consider paranormal activity, Bigfoot, things like that. So we see that there is a commonality between all these things. I think Kathleen's going to talk about abductees and their experiences that oftentimes are poltergeist activity associated with these things and other things. And how does this all tie in? There seems to be some commonality.
Well, you know, yeah, no, it's true. What were you going to say?
No, that's it. I think James is going to attest
to that. No, because Jacques Vallée was supposed to be on the, we're still looking for Jacques somewhere, but he was supposed to be on the panel. He's one of the first to notice that paranormal connection between UFOs and psychic phenomena and strange happenings. Also, of course, Anne noticed that in the 200,000 letters that came through. Well,
my wife did, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Anne Strieber, who was a real revolutionary in this business. Okay, we'll get to that. And let me introduce Kathleen Martin, who I think represents the foundational case in the contact experience. She is the niece of Betty Hill, Betty and Barney Hill. Was there, I know, I'll just tell it a little bit, when Betty called her sister and said, guess what happened? You know, this was in 1961 when Betty and Barney Hill were taken in the mountains of New Hampshire there. Actually, I went to New Hampshire and there's a roadside plaque erected by the state of New Hampshire saying this is where Betty and Barney Hill were taken by aliens, right there on the side of the road. So Kathleen represents a great history and also is an experiencer herself. Right? We're okay to say
that's correct, yes.
She wasn't sure about saying that, I mean, in the past, but thank you for coming out. And we're going to hear a lot about the history. Her new book is called Fact,
Fiction, and Flying Saucers.
Right.
And it is not about contact. It's about the history of government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, their findings, their decision to cover up their findings, and the individuals who were involved in the cover-up and their modus operandi. Co-authored with Stanton Friedman again. We've written 3 books together.
So thank you for that. Yes, Stanton has been here in the past, and hopefully he'll return at some point. Then we have James Gilliland, one of the, I think you represent kind of the most popular recent movement in ufology with your ECTI ranch. People can go out to Trout Lake, Washington and actually see lights coming out of the mountains, make contact yourself. It's an incredible phenomenon that James curates in a sense and introduces people to the phenomenon. If you have relatives that don't think this is true, bring them out to James's ranch. And how long have you been doing that for now, James?
I've had the ranch for 30 years.
Wow. And when did you...
But I had contact before. All throughout my childhood, I had contact.
But when did you notice that strange things were happening in the mountain there?
Well, I was building a spiritual retreat, doing a lot of process-oriented therapy and things like that, and I wasn't really looking for UFOs. And I guess a couple years into that and doing all-day meditations and things, they started contacting me. And you know, I started having a telepathic conversation with them, and I felt this incredible love and joy and bliss, you know, from them. And I was trying to find out what level of consciousness they were coming from, and it turned out that they said we're coming from a ship.
Really?
And so, yeah, so I had to totally rewrite my program, you know, to include ultra-dimensionals into the Ascended Masters and all the other things, and how it's all tied together.
Well, it does seem like consciousness is a big part of this. I mean, this is I feel the next level of contact is a conscious one internally. We expect disclosure to happen out there, but I think it's happening inside of us. That's where contact is made. So I'm just going to open with this quote from Whitley in his introduction to Jacques Vallée. I was hoping he'd be here, his book Dimensions, and I think this really kind of sets the pace of how we can look at this. Whitley says, we're dealing with a yet unrecognized level of consciousness, independent from man, but closely linked to the earth, which has its own relationship to cosmic forces. That's in the introduction to Dimension. So, Whitley, do you want to take off?
That's really good. I didn't realize I'd said that.
You did say that. It's
no,
right.
I'm just kidding. I know very well I said that.
But talk about what you mean, because I think this is the next level, the unrecognized level of consciousness.
Yes. And to expand a little bit on that quote, we are very much part of it now, every one of us. What wasn't clear to me when I wrote those words was that this unrecognized level of consciousness includes every single one of us. We all are part of that. Now, I want to circle back. How long should I talk about? 5 minutes?
Talk about 5 minutes,
okay.
yeah, and then we'll move on.
Circle back to what initially happened to me. First, I had a lot of experience when I was a child. But by the time I was 20, or even earlier, by the time I was 15 or 16, I had shut it out of my mind. It was gone. Until December of 1985, when it returned with a vengeance. It was almost like they were shaking me out of my sleep, trying to wake me up, and they'd been, at least since the previous October, coming to that house, and I was living in a state of incomprehensible terror. I had bought guns. I was really having a very American response to the unknown. I bought a shotgun. I bought a pistol. I built an alarm system put up in the house, and all that stuff. But then what happened to me on that night can be viewed as very similar to what happens to an animal in the wild, or a bull which is being given having his sexuality induced with an electrical charge into his vagus nerve. That was done to me. And I was, in other words, treated exactly like an animal. And I did not understand what had happened. Eventually, it became more clear over time. You all know that story. And I had, at that point, a decision to make. Am I going to sit back and say, damn them, treat me like an animal, screw this? Or am I going to go for it? And how do I go for it if I go for it? Because I really don't want to have that happen again, but I do want to learn more about this. They had started me at the absolute baseline of consciousness. And I have gone over 30 years from that point to this, where I am in conscious, useful, complex, rich contact, not only with more than one group of visitors from where I do not know, but also with us on other levels of consciousness. We do have souls. We definitely do have souls. We are, the nature of the body is to take us out into the physical world and into the stream of time, and that's why we're here. We're here to have novel experiences so that our souls can absorb the energy of our lives, and then after the body is finished and the soul comes out of the body, it looks back on its life and discards what it doesn't need and gains and absorbs what it does. And some of them do real well, and some of them don't. My wife's participation in this is of central importance. We went to an Indian reservation to give a speech together a long time ago, and afterwards, the head of the tribe said to Anne, "We've got an Indian name for you, it's 3/4." And I said, "Well, what about me?" He said, "You're 1/4." And that was right. That was true. Anne was the leader of this little team, and she still is. Here's what she gave. First, she kept me sane by simply, I thought she would divorce me or something. When you sit down to tell your wife you've been taken aboard a flying saucer by little men, you expect the worst. What she said was, "Oh, that's why you've been so crazy lately. Great. Well, what happened?" And we went on from there. And we'd never even talked about UFOs before, but she was ready to go right away.
Thank you.
Anne was a teacher. Okay. I'll go on when we
we'll get back to you. But, just the comment about that, it's like you went from the base level emotion, it's like they reformatted your brain.
Or I reformatted. I did the reformatting. I said, I'm not going to sit with this. I'm going to make this something valuable for me and for everybody who is willing to listen to me. And that I think I have done. Yes, and Ann did it. We worked together.
Yes. Thank you, Whitley. Robert, do you want to talk about your experience, but not in the way of telling a story, but how it affected your consciousness, your perception, your awareness of a sort of soul level of being? Is that a good? Are you looking at me strange there? Okay.
Probably the story and that.
Okay, the story and that. Sure, but
a little bit of both.
Okay.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Robert Perala. Whitley's right. I'm not the oldest guy in the business. I feel old this morning. I'll tell you, this is a tough gig to play. It was the 70s. When I was a kid, I saw apparitions from time to time. I knew there was something there, but I wasn't interested in spirituality. In December 26th of 1977, we were on a skiing vacation up in Lake Tahoe, where the California-Nevada border meets. And that night, I just lied down to go to sleep, and in the middle of the night, I was suddenly startled by what was sounding almost like a freight train going through the living room, and suddenly the whole room became charged with lightning speckles of indigo, violet, and purple, and suddenly, out of nowhere, came down what looked like 3 astronauts. They were tall, 8.5 foot tall. They glowed like the sun. As soon as I realized kind of what was happening, I started to scream. I went like that, and I was frozen. And then suddenly I was turned up, and I was placed in like a cocoon of some sort of, like a million needles around you of blue light. And with this, they had orange antennas, helmets, visors. I saw no faces. They did not, I don't know that they spoke to me. And suddenly, somehow, the house opened up on the side, and there was a swirling tunnel. And I was thrown through this tunnel at what feels like 1,000 miles an hour. And I remember screaming to the point where I was on fire. I felt like I was dying. In fact, I got to the point where I decided to surrender, that I thought, I'm dying, I will die, because you can't live in that. You can't live in that kind of pain. I'd love to tell you the light was a lovely story and wonderful, and that's not the story. And then to shorten it, when I arrived on the other side of this tunnel, I was in this spherical room floating in front of what looked like a glass object. I don't know how long I was there. There was nobody there to greet me. I didn't see any shapes, sizes, or forms, or entities of any kind. Suddenly I'm thrown back through the tunnel again, and it was, again, horribly painful. And then when I surrendered and decided that just to go blank and just to surrender to it, or even elect to die, it let go. Suddenly it was easier for me to just let go. And then suddenly I'm in this blue cocoon again, floated down onto the bed, and they stood. Incredibly, there's a photograph that was shot by Jeff Greenshaw from Falkville, Alabama, and it's only 10% of what I saw there. I don't know if you can get this or not, Mike.
Hold it up.
But it looks something like that, and I saw this later on in 1978 in a magazine. I said, wait a minute, that's a lot like what I saw. And how's that? Down? Right there? There you go. And so from that point, I was let go, and I was lowered down onto the bed, and without warning, the storm was over, the light was over, these 3 astronauts suddenly disappeared, and I lied there in a convulsion, and I threw up over the side of the bed, and I eventually, about probably 2 hours later, I crawled across the floor into the vanity little bathroom, pulled myself up, looked in the mirror, and realized I was sunburned from head to toe, and I was soaked in like an oil or like a honey. I had like honey all over me, or some kind of oil. And from that point, I'll just shorten it because I'll be very close. We've got speakers here. And you can see me at 7 o'clock at Noble Hall tonight and and see the whole story on the PowerPoint. But to get to the point, I lied there in a state of shock, And I had no idea what it was. I didn't think anything about extraterrestrials. Fast forward, I moved home, I went back home, and when I went into my apartment, I'd moved in the week before, I actually moved into the apartment, and that was the first day I was going to live alone. No roommates or parents or anything. And then I locked myself in my apartment for about 3 months, and I went to work, but I didn't tell anybody about what happened because I didn't know what it was. So how could I tell anybody else what it was? And also, I was thinking at that time it was a manifestation. I got a book called Beyond Reality by Jacques Vallée.
Yeah, who we're still looking for.
Who we're still looking for.
He may have made contact.
And, it turned out that there was a UFO conference. I looked up UFO magazine. That's where I found this photograph. And I said, wow, they're having a conference on this kind of thing. And I opened up the magazine, and there was a picture, and I went, that's impossible. That's kind of what I saw, only it's missing all the light, it's missing all the field and intensity around it. And I went to the conference, and I sat down, and I figured maybe this has something to do with extraterrestrials. And it was like, that was a little far from my imagination. I went to J. Allen Hynek. He had a little tiny cassette recorder. Remember the little cassette recorders we had with a little plastic window, and you put the cassette in, close the plastic window, press play and record. I was so interested that this was the go-to guy. He was going to answer my questions, and he said, I'm from a thing called Project Blue Book. We're recording people's testimonies. Tell me what you saw. I told him. He said, I believe you've had an encounter with something very unusual. And there was this man sitting right here where Steve is, next to me, and he kept kind of interrupting, and I was so engaged in telling Dr. Hynek my story, and going on, and he said, well, what else happened? And I was like, hang on a second. and he said, well, I was explaining, and said, hang on, I'll be right with you. And finally I turned around to see, who, and addressed, be nice and address the gentleman. I turned around, and it was William Shatner.
Captain Kirk.
That's awesome.
Go figure. Now, how do you think I felt going home when my friend Dan told me, what do you think it's going to be like when you went first public with your story and you'll be able to tell him the first time you told your story was to Captain Kirk?
Yeah.
I said, that just ruins the whole thing. So I'll end by saying this. It was the beginning of the journey, and it was the beginning of my spirituality. And from there, it was the esoteric sciences, the mystery schools, Maharishi, meditation, the yogis, the mystics, the Bible, the Gita, the Torah. I was looking for every kind of answer as to what is visiting us. Why is this a part of you? It's not just part of me, it's part of you. There's a governing body, the Elohim. It mentions even in the lost books of Job. You are descendants of the house of Pleiades and the house of Sirius. And it was right there the whole time. So thank you very much for coming. I will be at Noble Hall with photos explaining the whole series at 7 o'clock tonight. And thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Robert. It's interesting what you said about letting go, because Whitley talks about that too. We're fighting this thing because we want to preserve our ego, and then suddenly we release this idea of who we are, and there's this other level that opens. That's what I get from both of your testimonies and in all the books that Whitley has written. So, yeah, we're here to transcend ourselves. I mean, I've been obsessed with this subject for a long. Have people been obsessed with it? I mean, that's why we're here. We want.
I'm not obsessed.
You're not obsessed.
Yeah, no, not you.
He's made his whole life out. So let's talk to Steve. How obsessed are you with this?
That's a good question. I would say that I've been fairly obsessed with this subject. Well, first of all, let's go back. My upbringing and experience was fairly pragmatic. I went to the Naval Academy. I became an engineer. I was in flight school. Became a military pilot. Served my time. Never thought about this subject during that time. In 2001, now I'm out of the military, a good 15 years or so, and I have an experience, but it's a sighting. But it's a profound sighting as I've gotten into this. So that profound sighting told me a couple things. One, whatever I just saw was not something from the inventory. These objects that flew over my head did not obey the laws of gravity or anything like that. So that blew the lid off. And
was that shocking? Was that just
that was
a shocking moment for you?
I was a shock. It was like I jumped out of the hot tub, yelling at my wife. I'm soaking wet, getting on the computer, trying to figure out what I just saw. I made a report to MUFON. I found MUFON LA, and I filed my report. Thought, thank God, something, So I filed my report. I called LAX to see if they had anything on radar. Anyway, that's how I got involved with MUFON Los Angeles, and they invited me to a meeting. The next thing you know, I'm head of that chapter and went on to do that for 13 years. In those 13 years of time, of course, we followed up on many cases. And I'd say the majority of my board, we had a board, majority of them were contactees or abductees. To me, a contactee is someone that's kind of going along with the experience, or an experiencer, and then an abductee is someone who is not going along with it for whatever reason. So, but in this diving into the subject and just reading every book I could, from Graham Hancock to Whitley, I remember the first time I saw Whitley's book, I broke out in a cold sweat and I couldn't figure out why. I was looking at the cover of this book. Abduction was not a phenomenon at that time. It wasn't a known, really spoken about thing. I looked and I broke out in a cold sweat and I started having this visceral reaction. I didn't understand why, but I read the book. But anyway, in the years of following up on all these investigations with abductees, I found that it's a phenomenon that's real. It's a phenomenon that happens on both a physical level and then also on a spiritual level. I think the spirit does exist. I agree with Whitley that there's a massaging going on with the consciousness, I think. This is just a guess after studying many cases, that there is a phenomenon, a presence, an intelligence that is attempting in some way to change us or to communicate with us, and in that communication there is change, hopefully for the better. Now, not everybody takes the experience on that way, and it becomes a very negative thing, but I think other people take it on a very positive thing. Kathleen and I were talking about that earlier. So it has to do maybe with lessons learned in life and where you're going with it in this life. But I think the collective consciousness is also affected when any one of us goes through that. Somehow that information is transferred, and that's why even some of you who have not had direct experience have a notion that this is real, or there's something that's telling you there's actually something going on here, and that's what brings you here and sitting down in those chairs listening to us. But
you were changed somehow. Can you describe how you were before and after that realization?
So I became obsessed with the subject, but then also in my exploration of others, I started to have memories of my childhood and my past that I'd never put into context.
Abduction
type stuff, starting when I was about 2 years old, and then moving on from there through. There was a period in my life. I've never talked about this publicly, really.
You're among friends.
Yeah, I know. See, so I'm comfortable.
These are the only people you can talk to about this.
I know, and I think that, they read that too. So. But then I started having memories of a time in my life, my adolescent years, when I had notions that little guys were coming through the walls and taking me away. And I knew, and what I would do is I adopted for several years this technique of not falling asleep till about 3:30 in the morning. And this went on for years, where I knew if I stayed awake till around 3:30 in the morning, then the experience wouldn't happen. And so that was my method of dealing with this. But then finally one day, the event started happening again, and the usual wrestling, literally trying to fight with my mind against what was happening. And finally I called, because I was raised Catholic, I called upon Jesus Christ to help me, and that stopped it, and after that it never came back. So
was he an alien, you think?
I don't know. There have been abductees reporting, many abductees report friendly figures coming into their room, so it's a screen memory, and many people report Jesus Christ or the Buddha or Santa Claus. It really doesn't matter. The screen memory is there. My first screen memory was, I was a little kid. It was about 2 years old. My first abduction experience memory. Light under the door. I go out in the hallway as a little 2-year-old kid, and I see Beanie Boy from Beanie and Cecil coming at me. Little body, big head, big smile, really kind of creepy. And it came at me, and that's all I have of that memory. But from then on, I was terrified of going into that hallway day or night, but at night I wouldn't even go out there. So, little kid, that's the first memory I have of possible abduction. I don't know that these memories I have were abduction memories, but they came back to me and were placed into context after studying this phenomenon carefully and interviewing other people.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. But, you know, there is a level of shock, and I remember I drove cross country and I came back home and there was this mark on the back of my leg, and I met Bud Hopkins. He said, and one of his people in the group said, "That looks like an abduction mark." I said, no. There's an immediate denial to this level of consciousness that that's possible. And then you have to be around it. You look at some books, and then somehow you start to consider, I did, the impossible. That this may actually be what people say it is. I'm still finding that hard to believe. How could we be existing in this reality, and yet this whole other thing is going on, this whole other level of consciousness that's like coming in the night, and yet, you know, it's outside our frame of our worldview, of our paradigm, yet it exists. This is the most confusing part of the whole situation. These two realities exist simultaneously. So why don't you talk about some of that, because Betty Hill said she never ever stopped thinking about, every day she thought about that experience. And do you want to talk about your experiences in relationship to that, and you know how it changed you, because you were right there at ground zero with the whole abduction initiation into the worldview. So talk about that.
Yes, thank you. Well, I was 13 years old when Betty and Barney were abducted in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and I witnessed the trauma that my Uncle Barney experienced as a result of that. So in a sense, I developed a negative view of abduction. But Betty started, after the hypnosis sessions, after they had resolved these problems, Betty agreed to work with a team of scientists to attempt to call in a UFO. They called it a psychophysics experiment. And she attempted to call a UFO in on my grandparents' farm. I grew up across the street from my grandparents. And one morning, one of our neighbors called and spoke to my brother. This was children talking to one another. And he said to my brother, my father, and he was a commercial pilot, was returning home from work last night, and he saw a UFO coming in and landing on your grandparents' farm. That morning, my brothers and I went out and we found marks on the ground where this craft had landed. It was investigated. I believe it was by NICAP. My grandmother had also observed this craft. She was terrified. She didn't think it was going to happen. In fact, she said to Betty, well, you know, if they come and land, tell them to knock on the door, and I'll invite them in for coffee. When the craft landed that night, my grandmother was terrified. And and I don't know if it was the wind or what, but...
It's 3 knocks?
I don't know how many knocks there were. And so this was of interest. I'd also had a fairly close sighting with Betty and my mother and other members of the family at one time. And after that craft landed on my grandparents' farm, we started to have paranormal activity in my childhood home. We had not had that activity before. There were light orbs. I can tell you a story about what happened when I was in college, and I took my boyfriend home for the weekend. This was during the summer. My family owned an ocean faring boat, and we were going on a family fishing trip together. And during the night, my boyfriend awakened the entire family, screaming and running from the house. And so my mother went and chased him and asked what was wrong. The coat hangers had lifted from the closet in my brother's bedroom. They had flown across the room and landed on the boyfriend. My brother was in the service at the time, he wasn't home, and terrified him. It wasn't good for our relationship, I have to tell you. But we started to have this paranormal activity, light orbs. I observed one of these light orbs, and it was years later when my children and I were staying with my mother, and I was awakened during the night by my 5-year-old son. He was romping around the bedroom next to the bedroom that I was sleeping in, and really wreaking havoc during the night, enough to wake me up. I left my bedroom and I opened the door to his bedroom, and the nightlight was on, and there he was chasing an orb, kind of bluish on the outside, white on the inside, it seemed. It seemed to be lighter, and it was translucent, but it seemed to have intelligence. And he was having a great time with it. I was shocked, and I became terrified, and I picked him up and I rushed him into my bedroom, not realizing that it could go through the wall. And I tried to find a prosaic explanation for that. I tried to tell myself, well, maybe it was a car, the headlights from a car, and then I realized that there was not a road back there. And so I tried to find other explanations. Maybe it was ball lightning, but the weather conditions were not right for ball lightning. And as I came to terms with this, I started to talk to my mother about memories that I had had after that craft landed on my grandparents' farm. I remembered waking up on a table. I remembered non-humans all around. I was terrified by that, but I never told anyone. And when I told my mother, she remembered that event as well. But I grew up in a family where my aunt and uncle were so harshly criticized by debunkers that we were told never to discuss this, never to reveal this to anyone. And it was extremely difficult to hold it inside, as I have for many, many years. And even when I have told individuals who are investigators, they acted as if they didn't believe me, as if they were trying to accuse me of lying, that this was just my own subjective experience. And I say, yes, it was, but it was confirmed by my mother as well. And other individuals have been part of this.
It's only recently that you've actually admitted to this, isn't it?
Yes, it is only recently that I've decided that I really don't care what people think about that.
That's
so
where you
what?
Gotta go.
This is important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. So we have a sort of range of experience here, but I think, James, your story is a little different. It wasn't so much about trauma or that kind of rude awakening. It was more this internal connection. Talk about that. And talk about maybe how it's different from what you've heard here from these other people.
Well, I can shed a little light on some of the things. The orbs are many different things. We're having a little conversation in the back about that. But the ETs can actually project their consciousness out as an orb and interact with people. And the higher beings can do that. We have pictures on my website where I'm talking to Golden Light Eagle, and you can see my consciousness coming out as an orb and cruising around. It's kind of interesting. But when you reach a certain level of consciousness, that's a given. You know, it's not astral travel. It's beyond that. It's another level up. But they can do that. They can travel around, and that's where all that phenomenon stuff happens along with the ET contact.
Did you ever have one of these sort of harsh abduction type experiences?
Oh yeah, I had not the abduction. I've had them come to me, but I was trained in how to deal with them, luckily. So
how to have them not take you.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I had a lot of I guess it'd be abductions, but they're benevolent. But they still freaked me out. I didn't understand what they were. And I was in the very back part of our house, and my dad came in, and I was putting these big long screws. I was like 8 years old, and I was putting these big screws to the door so they couldn't come through the door.
There you go.
Screws are highly overrated as far as protecting against abductions, but that was my best effort.
So how do you go from there, that fearful experience, I'll ask other people this, to this awakened time?
Well, I had extensive training. I went through the teachings of the Inner Christ. I studied with Tibetan masters and yogis, and I learned extensive training in how to heal unseen negative influences and how to maintain your self-authority. And that's what we teach. We teach other people, so this doesn't have to be a negative experience. And it's just about having command over your reality, basically. And we can all do that. You know, we can all learn to do that. So I always tell people, just because you're dead doesn't mean you're enlightened. There are spirits out there that aren't your highest and best good, and just because you're an ET doesn't mean you're benevolent. You know, they have their agendas, and there's a lot of experimentation going on and things like that. So we just need to learn how to step into our power and set boundaries, you know.
Oh, okay, we'll come back to more of that.
All right.
Thank you. So this is a kind of overview, but I go back to you, Whitley, because you've become quite aware of your experiences and the transformation that happened to you, going from fear to this now almost really communion.
Oh yeah, and it's very definitely involved with my wife, as I sort of started on this before, and this is what the whole rest of my life is about, because she was a soul with a plan. And it was a hard plan to enact, but she has done it, and I'm going to respond with the rest of my life. Whether she came into life with this plan or not, I don't know. But she was initiated by nature when she had the first thing that happened was she took command of all these thousands and thousands of letters we were getting, and didn't just like stack them up. She read every one of them. She hired Laurie Barnes, a secretary who was with her for 15 years, to retype a lot of them. They cataloged them. They put them in boxes. That group, it's about 30,000 fully developed descriptions of experience, is now being given to a university. It's being collected by Rice University, and they consider it one of the most valuable repositories of descriptions of human experience that exists in the world. And she did that. Then, yeah, thank you for her.
And actually, the communion letters, a lot of those are published.
Yeah, 100 of them are published in the communion letters, which you can get easily. You go to Unknown Carter, go to Strieber.com, and you can get it for $3 for your Kindle, I think. Anyway, and it's those narratives she selected very carefully, and they are really eye-opening. In any case, let's go forward, because I don't want to take up too much time, and I want to say a lot in just a short time. Her next thing was a personal initiation. She suddenly dropped like a rock, and she'd had a massive brain bleed in 2004. I barely got her to the hospital in time. She barely survived. She went through every single level of complication that terrible illness has. And when she came out of it, she said, "I've had an NDE." And it changed her completely. She was no longer afraid of death. You go onto our website, Unknown Country, and you click on Anne's diary, and you go to the diary entry, "The Love That Led Me Home." And there is an extraordinary, simple teaching about the afterlife. Then, fast forward to a couple of years ago, she comes down with a horrible brain tumor from which there can be no recovery. She struggles with it for a while, largely for me, because I've been married to her for 45 years and we're deeply in love. But then she says, as it's beginning to ruin her being, as killing her, Whitley, I'm ready to go, and I want to do it while I'm conscious. I don't want to do it, I don't want to just fade away here, so let's do this. You face death that way. That's because you really aren't afraid. And she did it consciously, legally, I might add, in every way. We were very careful about that. And she died a beautiful death. Not even an hour afterwards was the first contact with her. And that has gone on to this day. She has empirically proved that she still exists. This soul's plan has now reached a point of being enacted. I'm here with my ability to write. She is there on the other side, and the intention, probably from time immemorial, has always been the same, to build a stable bridge between the two different levels of the human soul. And that is what we are going to be trying to do from now on. And where did it all start? It started with my initiation being beat up by the visitors until even this dense, heavyweight soul here noticed that something is going on.
Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you, Whitley. Wow. You know, actually, when you mentioned Anne, James felt her presence. You want to tell what you felt?
Well, I was getting a message from her, and everything that you're saying was what she was telling me, that she's working through you. And
yeah, she's
very proud of you, the work you're doing, and she kept jolting me in the back. I could feel her. And I think that one of the reasons we have an empty chair here is probably for her.
That's probably is Anne's chair. That's right. No, Anne,
yeah.
Listen, Anne is having fun, a lot of fun. Especially, you know, I was a practical joker in my life. Now I'm in real trouble because there's a practical joker in my life who I can't do anything about. Annie, from the depths of her being, was and is a teacher. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness, because she's such a sweet, kind, wonderful teacher. But she doesn't suffer fools gladly, not at all. She says she can get very tough.
So I mean,
there's like tears of endearment I'm feeling. It's almost like getting tears. She's so happy that with the work you're doing and what's happening here.
Well,
she's
good.
with us now.
Good.
Wow.
Beautiful energy.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So I know it has to do with somehow the contact experience, because she's the one who said it, right?
Yeah, the contact experience. Well, let me just say something about that real quick. You know, these little blue guys, how many of y'all have had any encounter with these short, dark blue frog-like dwarfs? Well, okay, a couple people. I have, that's who I work, that's who is in my life.
Those are your people.
Those are now. It started out with the Greys, and now it's with these guys. I think they're human beings in another form, and I think they've called themselves soul techs, and I think they are facilitating the movement of souls between this level and other levels. And they are people. They were once just like us.
Well, I think the UFO experience is waking us up to these spiritual realities.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite quotes from John Mack, he said that UFOs are like an outreach program from the universe for the consciously impaired. That's us.
That's a great quote.
So, Robert, do you relate to any of that? I mean, you became an awakened spiritual being because of your contact experience. What is the crossover between this hardcore, you know, very intense abduction and this awakening of the higher mind? I mean, what do you see it as for you?
Well, I think for the first thing would be it awakened me to humbly realize that I'm just a very small soul who's in a long evolutionary process. And I eventually woke up to realize that I was standing in front of all my teachers, that everyone, people that I disliked the most were my biggest teachers, because if it didn't startle me or upset me, those are the parts of me that aren't awake yet. And later on we became very close friends, as you know, with Danny and Brinkley. And I learned to do hospice work, and I learned to sit with people that were in transit. I mean, imagine this. You've just been given 6 weeks to lift off. Destination unknown. You'd be thinking really hard about this experience. And I've listened to many people tell me in their transition about visitors, people, lost loved ones like Anne, coming back, reaching across the veil to reassure us, to help us while we're here to consider that side. And I often, in my shows, whether they're a lecture or a concert, I will always say, if you've lost a loved one, if you've lost a mother or a father, or worse yet, a child that has gone before you, you will see them again. You will see them again, I promise you. And then finally, it just woken me to the fact that this is really a mission of service. As we grow, you know, they grow. There's a back and forth relationship in the seen and unseen. And we're really here as the wayshowers, the transition team, the ones who make the difference. We're here as learning vessels of holding the keys of enlightenment, like James has initiated over here, and Whitley certainly said it, when we are here as part of the transition team, and we're learning that relationship between those in the unseen and the seen.
You know, as you're talking, I'm realizing that we keep looking for ETs, but if we stand in front of each one of us, there's something infinite inside of us, looking into those eyes. If we recognize each other as this vehicle of infinite presence, we might not be so obsessed with looking for ETs out there, because each one of us represents the totality of existence, of the universe. So I think that's something we can, I mean, I'll try to remember, instead of putting people into a box and say, yeah, they're this. We're all vehicles of this infinite nature right behind those eyes, and we're beyond these ETs. I mean, it's beyond these boxes that we're trying to put this experience in. I mean, trying to put ourselves in this little box as a human being. That's the big lesson I'm learning here. What do you say?
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Talk about the paranormal aspect, or the infinite nature that you're understanding.
Okay, so I think that our consciousness are being exercised, if you will, and these higher intelligences communicate on a physical level, yeah, which may be abduction, or you can call it abduction, or you can call it contact, or somewhere in between. But so the issue is that intelligence is creating the curiosity in us to have the physical experience, which is seeing a craft or seeing a being. That's our curiosity there on the physical realm. But on the spiritual or conscious realm, I think it's an exercise that's going a lot deeper. Yeah, and we're being instructed in ways. For example, a lot of people who have sightings, just a physical sighting of a craft, if it's stationary and there for them, they often feel like they've been downloaded some sort of information. Oftentimes they can't put words to that information or what they've just been given, but it affects them, and they know they've been affected. I met a gentleman who had an experience like that. He was a successful commercial producer in England. He had an experience in Scotland where a triangle craft came down and stood in front of him for moments. He was blasted drunk. It was New Year's Eve. And after that experience, the craft went off, and he was cold sober, and everybody else was still drunk. He dropped everything in his life and decided he was going to make a documentary on UFOs, because he was trying to understand his own experience. So we have that curiosity that drives us, and we get these physical experiences, but yet it goes deeper. He felt like he had been downloaded information. And I think a lot of people have that experience. Have you been downloaded some? When I had my physical sighting, I think that there was something given to me. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, it was certainly, they took a crowbar and just smashed it into my brain and lifted up the lid. Because after that, my eyes were sort of open to all of these things. 9/11, when it happened, shortly thereafter, you know, I had questioned everything about it. Right. I questioned the whole narrative of how that happened, and everything from then on I've questioned. You know, the existence of our government system, the Federal Reserve, the IRS. Where did that all come from? Well, you find out it came from a place called Jekyll Island, and how we're all slaves, basically, under the control of this governing elite that really don't care about us that much. That's one negative way to look at it. But anyway, my mind was open, and I started challenging everything.
Right. Good. I mean, I think that's why we're all here, because we know there's another level of truth. Yeah, ETs, UFOs, that's exotic, but beyond that whole thing, we know there's more to reality. That's the essence of a conference like this. What else is really going on for us as human beings, as part of a bigger picture? Did you get sort of a download yourself, Kathleen, when you awakened?
Yes, I have received downloads during my visits to Craft, where, you know, I didn't go there willingly. I was taken there, but I realized that eventually, after I had forensic hypnosis, that they projected a very strong feeling of love toward me. They told me I was part of their family, that I had nothing to fear. And some people have said, well, it's just Stockholm Syndrome. But I want to embrace that feeling, you know, subjectively, of that feeling of love. And they've given me information, they've given me downloads, and that's why I'm speaking now, because they've told me that they're very, very concerned about human behavior. They're concerned, they say, about our environmental impact upon this planet that we're not treating well. They're very concerned about nuclear weapons, that we might destroy this planet again. They're going to do everything that they can do to prevent that from happening. But it involves raising human consciousness, the vibrational frequency, and I was very confused about that. What does that mean? And just recently, they told me that telepathy is the universal language, and they want to bring humans back to a point where we are telepathic again, that we can communicate with them telepathically, and that will bring about disclosure from the bottom up. The government is never going to tell us, I don't think. But as more and more people become aware of what is truly going on, I think that we will have disclosure, because the tipping point will be reached where too many humans know about this and think that it's extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I heard that telepathy was the original language, and when the Tower of Babel, that story came in, we had to reduce things to words, and that's the Babel we talk every day, this Tower of Babel. But our true language, we're a collective consciousness, especially at an audience like this. We can keep developing that skill of communication because we have it, it's innate in us. So, but what Kathleen brought up is some of the work you deal with about dealing with the planetary consciousness and saving it, and talk about that a little bit.
Well, basically what they've told me is that the Earth has been colonized and it's been terraformed, and there's 12 major star nations. There's others that were involved too as well. And this planet is unique. It has such a plethora of genetics here, both human, plant, and animal. A lot of that was brought here. And it's like no other planet, and life is sacred here, and just the abundance of life, the diversity of life. And so they're extremely concerned. And thank you for bringing that up. They're extremely concerned with the consciousness here, how we behave towards each other and the planet and what we're doing. They're giving us all downloads constantly,
We could listen to it.
Yeah. And a lot of times you just be, washing your dishes, and all of a sudden you get this like kind of aha moment. It's like any kind of mundane activity you're doing, raking leaves or something, and all of a sudden you just get this information. A lot of the people think they're seeing like Jesus or Mary, and it could be a Pleiadian. It's because they're all part of that Shekinah, divine feminine energy. So it's really interesting, but it's happening on a huge scale right now. There's a mass awakening going on, and they're touching a lot of people. There's soul activations, initiations happening, and they're kicking the star seeds on and the ground crew on right now in a very big way. And there's a huge uprising going on, and you're it, you know. You're the ones you've been waiting for, basically. You're the ETs you've been looking for.
Thank you.
It's within you.
Are you going to share that message you got, Whitley?
Yeah.
Don't scare them, but it's true. Go ahead.
Which message are you thinking about?
The one with the no, the ETs talk to you about the civilized worlds and what's happening around the universe every day. There's a
I'm sorry, I didn't realize what happened.
Where?
Well, people jumped because my voice suddenly became very loud.
You just transported them.
Yeah, well, okay. All right. Well, I want to say something else. I'll tell you that very briefly. And I really don't talk about that publicly. I talk about it privately for a very specific reason. The reason is it's not corroborated. It's something that just came into my mind. And when you hear me talk, you'll notice that every single thing I say, if I'm talking about my implant, I'm talking about experiences, etc., there's always some backup somewhere. It's not, but since he brought it up, I'll say this. No, I'll say it now. I also don't keep secrets. I mean, you know, I just have a certain level of interest. I have an interest in the theory of knowledge, and I don't want to give out things that are, to me, speculation, and this is at that level. But anyway, what I was told was this. I asked about how, you know, this universe is so absolutely enormous. How are there, how many intelligent species, and do they go extinct? And the answer was every more than 1 a second go extinct forever. And more than 1 a second raise their eyes for the first time. All over this universe. And it's not the only universe either. Not even the only physical universe. And we will find, as the Master of the Key said many years ago, there are other physical universes beyond this one. God's a big deal. Boy. Okay, I want to now talk about and I think incidentally I have told that story about the extinctions and so forth before. I probably should keep telling it now at this time in our own history. Anyway, there are 3 pillars of the soul. This is all about the soul. That's why we're here. And when people tell you you don't have a soul, and neurologists are saying, well, we can prove that consciousness is confined to the brain, they are wrong. And I have empirical knowledge that they're wrong. But anyway, the 3 pillars of the soul, and this is the last thing I need to absolutely say today, are love, compassion, and humility. And how do you address these in your life? Well, if you're part of the Western world, there's lots of different traditions that can address this. There is a very simple way of doing that. You sit yourself down, you intentionally put aside everything you have ever thought about religion, about Christianity, about the Gospels, about beliefs. Put it all aside. Read them again, as if you had never read them or heard about them before. And you will find in those Gospels a blueprint how to live out of love, what compassion really is, and how to make that part of your life, and how to be humble. Because, and in this experience, the real people up here, the real people who are doing this out there, are all humble people. They're humble, ordinary people who you can walk right up to and start talking at any time. The ones who have a whole big ego trip going, they're not doing this. They're out there for other reasons. It's not my business what their reasons are. But humility, the only time the visitors beat me up is when I'm not humble. And I'm, of course, you know, I'm here to learn, and so the most recent time that happened was about a month ago. So, but anyway, this is the basic message here, and take it to heart, because you want a strong soul in this life and beyond, and you can have one. It's not hard.
But how do you integrate that with the traumatic, awful first experience you had?
Oh, the initiation?
Yeah.
Well, look, if you wanted to be a medicine man in some of the Native American communities, some of the tribal communities in the Americas, and in fact, this was true all over the world. It's the way initiation happened. In one particular tribe, and I'm not sure which one, they had a very interesting initiation. If you felt, I think I'm a medicine man, it's okay, jump off a cliff. If you lived, you were right. If you died, you were wrong. In other words, it's facing the ultimate challenge of being. That's initiation. And I was taken to a challenge at that point because I had already been working for a long time beyond death, into a fear beyond death. And you know what that is? The really deep fear of close encounter experiences. They are living outside of time, looking in. We are living inside time. All of our experience comes to us, and it's always novel, new. When everything that happens to you, you don't expect. Few things you expect, but mostly you don't. And all of that brings energy. You're here. You have paid your dues of living and having to die into the unknown for this. And when you're close to them, you start to rise out of the time stream, and your reason for living is ending. And it is much scarier than dying, because it's like being dead and alive at the same time. So of course it's terrifying. That's what it was. But now that I know that, and I understand that I live in the time stream and why I'm here and why I'm supposed to be here, it turns out it's possible for us to live in the time stream and at the same time know and understand that there is life outside of the time stream, and that's where we're headed, and you don't have that fear anymore. Anne said to me recently that you live in we call the level of violence. And it's the level of violence because of the fear of death. And that fear is the basic fundamental fear. And all other fears and the violence that goes with them start there. Our mission is to end that fear and change the way life is in this level. And we will cease to be in the level of violence and will rise to another level as a species.
Thank you. Thank you, Whit. Yeah. So, Robert, you're a pretty humble, loving, compassionate person. I find that in my personal experience with you. Did this ET encounter have anything to do with this, or was this your own soul's path separate from that experience, or maybe you can't tell the difference?
You know, I asked myself, you know, had the experience not happened, would I really have ended up here? You know, when something is it comes into your life to that degree, I thought, how is this all, what does this mean to me? Yes, it all started, I would say, with the experience. I mean, I went, before the first UFO conference, which was in the San Francisco Airport Hilton in April of 1978. There was one before it. I just learned yesterday. And my booth is next to J.J. Hurtak and the Hurtaks. And they were saying, no, the big one before, there was one before that, and that was in Costa Rica. But others, there really wasn't conferences like this that would share a UFO information. When I got to the one that I got to, there was only about probably 19 or 20, 22 of us. There was a young Richard Hoagland. Nobody knew who he was at the time. There was Jacques Vallée, there was J. Allen Hynek, William Shatner, and Stanton Friedman, and a few others. But looking back at it, and looking at you guys, at this audience, and then looking at things like Shakti Fest that was just here last week, Woodstock, historical, that period of the 70s and the 60s, but certainly the 70s, was the birth of what you today call the New Age movement. So it mixed science, spirituality, our good bedfellow friends. They used to say they had nothing in common. They absolutely coalesced together. So yeah, I would say that experience absolutely brought me into spirituality, and it also, more importantly, brought me into healing and behavioral science, because do you ever think to yourself, the clearer you become, the crazier everyone else is starting to look? You know, and that's because you're growing, and the more you grow spiritually, mentally, and intuitively, you start to notice things around you. So yeah, at that point, I would say that this whole beginning led me on the path of learning the virtues of tolerance and compassion and selflessness and forgiveness, which is a fantastic thing for my ego. But certainly it taught me unconditional love and to be in service and to know that everybody around you, and being on this with some of the nicest teachers in the world.
Thank you. So, thank you, Robert. Steve, as Robert was talking, Whitley, do you think the government is so against this because they don't want, actually not the ETs, but an awakened spiritual population?
Oh no, that's not. They're not against this. They're scared. There's a big difference. If you go on Unknown Country today or anytime soon and click on Whitley's journal, and incidentally, there's a rumor out there that my website is all subscription and you have to pay. There's an area of it, if you want to support it, you can, but most of it is free, including Whitley, this journal. And the journal entry is called Mistake Made Long Ago and How to Correct It. The mistake was a very natural one. It started with the fact that the people who came into first tangible contact right after the war were all warriors, soldiers, generals, colonels, people who had been fighting all their adult lives. And suddenly they saw this as a possible invasion.
Let me just, thanks. I was just seeing what Steve had to say, but we'll get back to that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Let's see, I might go, I think that there are I don't think the government holds the quote-unquote our government holds the technology or holds the secrets to this technology, but I do believe the secrets to contact the technologies that go along with that are held by some group. I don't think it's our government per se.
But it's a soul awakening. That
this is a soul awakening. As I was listening to Whitney, love, compassion, and humility. I was thinking, what a simple, easy lesson that is for all of us to remember. So, and to practice right now. I could call for it. In fact, I'll do this just as a small experiment. If we would all think about those three words, love, compassion, and humility, for a second, and kind of meditate on what that means for a second. Let's do that now. Just for a second. If everybody just takes that on as a challenge, think about that for a sec. And then we open our eyes and feel the energy or the vibration, as you might say, change in this space. We're all here now to learn. So how interesting that we were talking about abduction and contact, but really what it's about is a sort of a spiritual awakening that's going on inside each one of us, right? So we can amplify that by talking about it and by communicating with one another that say, yes, we can say, yes, this is happening. I acknowledge, I see that in you and you see that in me, and it kind of elevates that vibration. And I think that, I mean, if we all walked away from this conference with those three words in our mind and actually tried to put them into practice in our lives, what a difference that would make if we could affect other people in the world that way and kind of cause this mass awakening. It would change. It would be a game changer. Now, going back to the physical realm for a second, I do believe that certain people hold the technology as guarded secrets because they're in control and they don't want to lose that control. and you see it every day in our media. They are that media thing that controls the minds of most people is in a panic mode right now.
Right.
And they're losing control. And I think our elevation of consciousness here is going to be part of that awakening. But I think I agree with these two guys here. They're in service, and I think that's a key element to our awakening, is being in service of others.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's why we're all. Thank you. Yeah. So, Kathleen, do you see this movement as progressing? You know, you were there from the beginning, early 60s. How do you see it, this awakening, changing in people and becoming more public as a contact movement, I would say?
I see it as being highly positive, and I have seen over many, many years that fear factor, that trauma being emphasized by our media, by government officials, that, you know, this is not happening, the denial. But as public consciousness raises, I think that it's a very good thing. But remember, when a government can keep its populace ignorant and in fear, it can control those people. And I think that we're rising up above that, and more people are realizing what is occurring and the direction that we all need to take as humans.
James, why don't you talk about your direct downloads and, you know, the messages you're getting and receiving from these beings, if you care to share.
Yeah, like I'm getting downloaded right now while I'm sitting here. So
what are they saying?
All of you are being downloaded right now. We're all getting downloads, and a lot of us, you know, people say, you know, well, what do you think about this? And, you know, I said, you know, I don't think about it. I let it come through, you know. So, you know.
What are you getting right now? I'll tell you.
They're extremely happy that what's happening here and the awakening happening here, and they're talking to me about the collective consciousness and that we're affecting the whole collective consciousness. What's being done here is anchoring that consciousness and energy into a vortex, which is happening across the planet right now. We're affecting the whole planet because we're all in that unified field. And we're putting a big dent, you know, in the Archon network right now.
Let's give ourselves a hand.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say one more thing. I love what Whitley is saying about love and compassion and, what was the other one? Humility, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's so important. I'd like to add courage to that. I mean, when I connected with these lion beings, I was getting my butt kicked, and I've already died, so I don't really have the fear of death anymore. I say, yeah, release me from this body, it'll be your worst mistake. But the courage right now, it's a very important factor right now, and we all need to let go of the fear of being cut out of the herd and being judged or traumatized or whatever, and we need to find that inner lion within each and every one of us right now, because we're going to need it. And whatever energy you want to call that, but it's very important right now to you know, really step into our power right now and just, you know, I hate to be PC incorrect, but call bullshit, you know.
What do you mean, like you don't have to name names, but
yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, Whitley was talking about that, you know, are these leaders and these speakers and every level, religious, political, it doesn't matter, even this field, you know, are they focusing love and compassion? Are they getting you in touch with your own love and compassion and humility? You know, and how are they treating their people off the podium? You know, we really need to look at that. You know, where's the money coming from? You know, I could go and say, yeah, I hung out with the Rockefellers and this and Clintons and everything else, but, you know, I like what Gurdjieff said. You know, he said, you know, it's not the measure of a man to be, you know, I guess it was fully acclimated to a totally sick society. And when you start name dropping, you know, look at the names you're dropping and your associations and things like that. So it's very important to what is the end goal. The end goal is to empower you as an individual, to give you this knowledge, this wisdom, to tap you into your own multidimensional divinity, and that's the end goal. And if it's taking you away from that, it's kind of a distraction. And it's good to share all these stories. I think it's awesome, and I think they're great, and it helps support our own stories and our own experiences. I think that's awesome, but we have to get really careful on when is this a distraction, when is this, you know, what are the frequencies around this?
Around what?
Around the information. And so it's like a good example. I could sit up here. If you don't have your own BS meter going and your own inner sensitivity going, I could tell you all kinds of stories, you know. I could tell you I was, you know, Cleopatra in a past life. How would you know, you know? How would you know? You know, I could make up all kinds of stories. You wouldn't know. And I really want to see people get in touch with their own inner sensitivity, develop that BS meter, and use the basic universal principles to discern, you know, is this information, you know, helpful? Is it assisting in the awakening and healing process? You know, what's the real motive behind, you know, what these people are doing? And take a, you know, brutal, honest look at it. And we need to kind of focus our energies on those that are empowering us, you know, that, you know, it's not about being all pumped up, like you're saying, with an ego and saying, you know, I did this, when you keep hearing I mean, look at Obama's speeches, my God, you know. That's when you keep hearing
using
that.
I a lot?
Oh, yeah.
72 times in one lecture.
Yeah, exactly. And so look at that, you know. In the Native American tradition, there is no I, you know, it's always we, you know, we're all one, you know, we're all in this unified field. So we really need to focus on that, you know, and work together in bringing this energy out.
Thank you. Well,
Thank you.
Whitley, you mentioned something before about the government not necessarily hiding this, but they did this because they were
afraid. And what happened was that basically over the years, the public was left to guess about what might be going on. And the result of this was that, I mean, people were seeing these things. They were all over the newspapers in the 50s, and the hucksters and the hoaxers came out to make money off of it and feed off the public imagination and feed off people's confusion. Disinformation came out to make sure that the public was as scared as the military was, and it just turned into a great big mess. And now where we are is that we have, we, the people, are bringing this finally into focus in ways that the government never could and still can't, because they still live by as far as I can tell, and I'm no insider, they still live very much by the idea that this is dangerous, aliens, and that's all it is. And yeah, darn dangerous. You know, I got one whomped up me by them. They were darn dangerous. But there's more to that, more to this than that, a whole lot more. But it's up to us, a new world, if we can take it. Yeah. If we can take it.
Thank you. That seems like the theme. Did you have a comment? Because we'll have some questions from the audience, but did you want to comment on that, Kathleen? Because I feel like you're tapping into this multidimensional awareness from your experience and sharing that more and more. Is there anything you want to say about that?
I really didn't have much to say about that,
okay.
Except for that the contact that I have now is not at all negative. I'm no longer being abducted and taken to craft. I feel a very strong tingling sensation through my body when they're near me. I hear in my head kind of music, chirping sounds, only when they're nearby or when I'm speaking with other experiencers. And then I receive the messages, the loving messages about how important this is, how concerned they are about humanity and how they are here to raise human consciousness, the collective consciousness of all of us. And so that's why I've decided to speak out, that they want me to tell people that this is the reason they're here.
knew you had something to say. It's like we're all messengers of something beyond our personalities. That's what it feels like is going on here. We're reflecting the consciousness here and back and forth, and we're taking it to another level. So does anyone have a question that we'd like to ask the panelists? You want to come up? You have a question? No questions? That's great. No questions. Can you believe that?
Just a quick question. You speak of your abductions when you were children, and now you feel just complete love from them. Are they the same beings who abducted?
My parents knew it was going on for a lot of reasons. One is this apparent large white owl used to stand in the backyard and made my father really nervous. And then they were aware of the fact that I was going in the night, and they nailed the windows, the screens closed in upstairs bedrooms where we were. Of course, I mean, you know, they thought of that as something I would go out across the roofs of the house. So I just started going downstairs, and they were asleep in another part of the house, and it didn't stop me. But then when that stopped, it was awful. It was devastating, and I finally just put it into my unconscious mind because I couldn't bear the loss. And then when it came back, there was an incredibly eerie feeling of familiarity that I didn't understand and put aside in the first few months after the close encounter experience in late 85, until I was under hypnosis with Dr. Donald Klein. And he was a very practiced man. This is a man who had solved many cases by hypnotizing people and enabling them to remember things like license numbers of hit and runs. I mean, he was the real deal. And he suddenly said to me because of his long experience doing this, he noticed a change in the timbre of my voice. And you know, you're not asleep when you're hypnotized, at least I'm not. And he said, "How old are you?" I was describing something. He said, "How old are you?" And this little child's voice comes out of my mouth. 12. Unbelievable. And I realized it's them, the same ones. That's why it's so familiar. And, you know, my experience is pretty rough. It's a lot rougher now than Kathleen's, but I'm kind of a Joe Sixpack of this thing in the sense that, you know, I'm going to screw up, and they've already told me we have no forgiveness for you. And I thought, oh my God, but then there's another side of that coin. There is somebody who does have forgiveness for me. It's me. We have to find ourselves. That's all what it's all about.
That's good. That's what we have to not forget, our human side, you know, to love and forgive and value ourselves. So Robert, you keep talking about that one experience, but have there been other experiences with other beings? I mean, you're here every year, 5 years, Robert's been coming here as an MC, but there's something that keeps bringing you back to that, and was it seated in your consciousness of ET connections?
Well, I didn't know anything about ETs, but before all that happened, when I was a young boy, I had seen apparitions. And these are men and women like you and I who have simply benefited from greater time and greater knowledge. At one point, they had lived in this world, and they had lost their body. There is no death. You're just simply, they ran out of time and the body drops away. In fact, death is a great way for an argument to break out. Because they say, I'm still here and I'm still me. But when I was a young boy, I saw apparitions, and I would tell my mom and my dad there were visitors at night, sometimes children. It's not that they talked to me or spoke to me or tried to make their ambassador. It was nothing like that. I was a witness to a phenomena. And they said, there's something wrong with this kid. You know, and they made me do the first grade over again. Go figure. And because they thought they were kind of trying to figure out what this phenomena was. I said, you must have seen them. And so I saw these, I later learned that they were discarnates. And then as I began to realize, okay, there's spirits around it, I get that. I wasn't really overly religious. Then the happening happened in 1977, and then I put the two together, that the world actually, you're surrounded by a committee that walks with you each and every day. They hear your thoughts, actions, and deeds. They support you. And there's some that don't support you. The key to this is, what are you calling into your life? Have you noticed that some of the real heavy, violent people with violent belief systems that are deeply attached to those belief systems? Or it could even, and it even comes in the heart of religion, as we have found around the world. And they become committed to this, you know, strange aberrated belief systems, like our religion is the right religion, therefore all the others must be wrong, which is, I think, a flaw in thinking. Or you have the heavy metal crowd, perhaps, that are calling in darker aspects of their experience. Not to say that I don't like heavy metal music, but... You know, and I don't want them all coming to me later at my show going, we heard what you said, you know. All right, we'll fix you backstage. But that said, I'll just end by saying that it's a matter of, what are you calling into your life? What you are attracted to is a reflection of you. So when they say, I really, really, really love... I met Tony Bennett one time, a remarkable guy. Do you know that this guy has sung so many love songs that he literally radiates love? Because what he's attracted to is that sense of wonder and enchantment and singing songs that lift people's spirits. So he becomes that. Likewise, the darker aspect, whether it's in sciences, music, or religion, they call them the darker aspect, they become very hardened and disillusioned. So I would invite you to go home and ask yourself, what am I inviting into my life?
Thank you, Robert. I'm just wondering how many people here have had some kind of experience, contact. Anybody? Well, that's a good. And how much of that was paranormal or outside the ET, or kind of a spiritual thing? Yeah, look at that. It's this. So, and I think there is a shift. There's a shift. We're moving away from that fear, just like everyone has been saying on the panel, and it's a collective thing. You know, there's actually less abductions from what I've heard. Yeah. And do you see that too, Kathleen, as far as your research?
Yes, I do.
So there's a change in this.
I do
transition. You do too, and you do too.
Yeah.
So
it's much more engagement than abduction. I had the feeling that the abduction phenomenon ended, actually.
Yeah, I think so too. They've taken what they. What do you say, Steve? You were going to say something?
No, I was seeing in the cases we studied, quite a few more now who are experiencers, meaning they're cooperating with the event, and in cooperation, there's learning. You know, there's this higher learning that it's easier to facilitate that learning for this consciousness that's interfering with us. We become a focal point for what's happening out there. You know, Whitney's a pioneer, and all these folks here are pioneers. We've just become a sounding board for what you guys already know is happening. And I hope we can amplify that.
No, I think that represents an integration somehow in the collective consciousness. We've kind of got that level. Like, you know, Whitley says he was cracked open there, and it's like, you did it for a lot of us, Whitley. Thank you for taking that.
There's a question.
I'm a tough cookie. I'm definitely, if I get beat up, I'm coming back as best I can every time.
Whitley Strieber, let's give him a hand. UnknownCountry.com. Thank you, Whitley. Robert, give us a little answer, and then your statistics. Where we can find you. Yeah.
Okay. Real quickly, you can find me at robertperala.com. My new website didn't make it this weekend, but it will be up on Friday. I will be at Noble Hall at 7 p.m. tonight. And we're going to surprise you, actually. Well, I just spoiled it, didn't I? There's going to be some music first. It's very incredible, because, you know, I'm in the music business. And then I'll do my presentation. And then I brought Orion Johnson with me, who is a NASA astrobiologist who was stationed at UC Berkeley and at the ET Detection Center in Southern California, where he detected biosignatures. There are clusters in space that they detect as a biosignature. They know these are meteorites or whatever. The ones that they're concerned about are the ones that sort of go and then stop, change velocity and direction. He found these biosignatures And he spoke to kind of the wrong people, I guess, about it, and then he was let go. But he's going to show you a little bit about the Galactic Center and biosignatures, and I will show you a little bit about the origin of the soul. You'll see a full in-depth of the abduction experience. And then there's personal growth anecdotes for living. It's a great, great presentation. Noble Hall, 7 p.m. I hope to see you there, and you can pick up a nice copy of Divine Blueprint there.
Thank you, Robert, for your contribution.
Enjoy.
Let's give him a big hand. And as a great MC here as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Steve Murillo.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank you guys for your attention and you know, playing along with us and listening, and hopefully you guys have gained a lot from this. My organization is uparsla.org, uparsla.org. We meet every third Tuesday of the month in Studio City at the Unitarian Church, and we host a meeting and we have a speaker. Everybody from Preston Dennett, Richard Dolan. These folks, next month in June we have Linda Moulton House, so in case you missed her here, come to Studio City if you live in Los Angeles on the third Tuesday of the month and find us. It's been an honor to be here among these you know, very, very well-known people and in the ufology business, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for being part of that, Steve. Thank you so much. Kathleen, where can we find you?
Well, first I wanted to address the question about good versus evil. I'm MUFON's Director of Experiencer Research, and I strongly believe in sending questionnaires to experiencers. And one of the questions that we asked is how they would characterize the experience they're having. About 9% have stated that they believe it is evil. So we had to take a look at evil. What does that mean? We looked at the marks on experiencers' bodies, and we found that those individuals who are having contact with beings that they characterize as evil are having deep scratches on their bodies. They're not having scoop marks. They're not having the triangles that experiencers of the neutral or good and bad or good are experiencing. So I think it's important to help everybody, regardless of the type of experience they're having. My workshop is this afternoon in Lotus. It's from 2 until 4. It is on interdimensional contact. I'll be talking about several cases that I've investigated personally. My website is Kathleen-Martin.com. You can purchase my books there, autographed copies. They're also available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, in several different formats. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for being here, Kathleen.
Thank you for bringing that up.
And James, just give us your coordinates.
Yeah. You can contact us at ECTI.org, and we're actually having like a contact in the desert. It's more like contact in the mountains coming up July 4th weekend up at Mount Adams, where you can go out and see the ships for yourself and experience the multidimensional beings. And I'm actually giving a 3-hour intensive at 1:45, and I entitled it Ego versus Your Multidimensional Higher Self, and how to break out of that and get back in touch with your higher multidimensional self. And so that'll be a 3-hour intensive, and we're going to teach you how to heal unseen negative influences, how to maintain your self-authority, kind of like a who's who in the universe. And there's, as I said before, there's some beings that serve you and they're very service-oriented, and there's some that are self-serving, and how to discern between the two. So it's very important, you know. I'm not going to give you a half-truth. I'm not going to say everything is good, and I'm not going to say everything is bad. You know, I'm going to give you the whole truth. And I've always been a straight shooter, and I try to give the most accurate information I can, and it changes. As more knowledge comes in, I learn more, and truth is not fixed, you know, and we need to realize that. It's evolving, and we're all evolving, and we have to start letting go of the past and some of the old beliefs and be open to new beliefs and new realities. So
thank you.
Again, thank you so much for coming.
Great. New Realities is the name of my company, newrealities.com. I'm Alan Steinfeld. You could look me up on YouTube, youtube.com/newrealities. This has been a beautiful experience for me, really heart-opening. A great crowd. Thanks for being here, too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.